SABC News presentation.
Good evening and welcome to Interface. My name is Rams Mabote. Global rating agencies are still skeptical of South Africa's economic growth prospects. Reports about political instability and the recent strikes have created negative perceptions about the country's competitiveness. This evening on Interface, we discuss whether or not South Africa is losing its place as a global market player. Let's look at this insight by Lindo Zikwi first.
Is South Africa on a downhill slide? Is her economy on the brink of collapse while the rest of Africa goes up? With the end of apartheid in 1994, there were great expectations. Democracy and freedom being key rewards, South Africa sought to re-establish herself economically and earned the title Gateway to Africa. The infectious Madiba magic, which had its firm grip on all those who idealized peace and coexistence, permeated across all races and ethnic groups. But to many, this image of a South Africa alive with possibility is quickly fading. Arguably, the cornerstones of democracy such as security, education and health have been severely compromised in recent years. Recently, a tragic confrontation between the police and striking mine workers in Marikana resulted in 45 deaths. Reports of government failure to deliver school books in parts of the country dominate the media, and the state of public healthcare facilities nationally is not worthy of praise. Global rating agencies have downgraded the country's credit rating, and crippling industrial strikes have added to South Africa's challenges, which include high rates of unemployment, historic rural underdevelopment, and general marginalization of the poor. Even with these challenges, a report by the presidency seems to offer a different view. South Africa has seen a 10.5% increase in tourist arrivals. New HIV infections have decreased from 1.4 to 0.8%. South Africa has formed strong institutions to safeguard her hard-earned democracy. The Constitution is an indication that fundamentally and idealistically, South Africa is on the right track. But does this guarantee positive perceptions at home and abroad? Is South Africa still a land of great prospect and opportunity?
That insight was compiled by Lindo Zikwi. Is South Africa losing its global appeal? Let's welcome our guests, Mila Matola, CEO of Brand South Africa, Professor Adam Habib, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, and Christy van der Westhuizen, Research Associate at the Institute for Social Justice at the University of the Free State, who is joining us from Cape Town. You may join this discussion. Comment on our Facebook page, Interface on SABC3, or send a text message to 33728. Mila, let me start with you. You just had a summit on skills and competitiveness.
Yes.
And you look at this insight, and it says we seem to be losing some appeal. Did you find from your summit, or did it speak to these issues that this insight speaks about?
Thanks, Rams. Well, the summit actually focused largely on South Africa's competitiveness and in particular the issue of skills and education and what role they have to play. The reason we focused on that was because, as you know, the recent World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index continues to highlight, again, the issue of education as one of the impediments in terms of competitiveness. However, we sought to look at how do we get to address this issue, because it is something that is important for us as an organization tasked with monitoring and ensuring that the country becomes competitive as a brand. It was important that we understand the nexus between skills education and competitiveness and what sorts of actionable ideas can emerge out of this.
Prof, there seems to be a perception in the country that we're no longer the flavor of the month that we were in 1994. We're no longer this Madiba South Africa, the magic is gone. Is this perception overstated?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think we also romanticize what 94 to 99 actually did. I mean, just remember in the first 5 years of our transition between 94 and 99, we doubled our employment in this country. Inequality levels increased quite dramatically in this country. We had the HIV/AIDS scourge, and we didn't deal with that appropriately. So South Africa was not a land of honey, milk and honey in 1994, neither was it in 1999, and neither was it in 2004. There was a sense, however, for businessmen that we were on the right track. The economy was playing. We had the growth and employment redistribution strategy. But inequalities were increasing at that point, and people were saying this thing is going to explode. So I think we romanticize the past, but there's no doubt that there's a sense at the moment that things are challenged. Levels of corruption are very high. We have the Marikana massacre. Inequality levels are high. And we've got very, very different perspectives coming out from within the state. And there doesn't seem to be a significant leadership coming out to say this is the path we're following. And I think there is a challenge that we lost our path. But I do think we tend to romanticize our past, even our 94-99 period, when we have headlines like that.
But it would seem that in 1994 or 1999, yes, you've mentioned all these problems, unemployment doubled and things like that. But there was this sense in this country that there's some glory. People were smiling, people were excited about this new thing that has just been born called South Africa, and it's going to be a great country.
That's right. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. This was a honeymoon period. This was the last colonial overthrow of a colonial power. We had Madiba around, and Madiba was the president. We were talking about reconciliation. All of that, there was a sense that we were on the right track. But to be honest, we made some serious mistakes in that period. In economic policy, we forget this. People often say, we've lost track now. We've lost track in 1996 because we embarked on an economic policy that accelerated inequality. And what happens in inequality is your society gets polarized. And as it gets polarized, you have the kinds of fractiousness, the divisions, the kinds of things that we saw in Marikana. So I do think that that's true. But yes, currently, we just don't seem to know where we're going. There isn't the semblance of leadership. And the big difference, let's be honest, is in 1999 and 2004, there was a sense that while you disagreed with Mbeki, this was a man who had a plan. President Zuma just doesn't give you the semblance that he has a plan, and that's the big issue.
We'll get to that. Let's get Christy, who's speaking to us from Cape Town. Christy, good evening. And the big question I'd like to ask you most importantly is this a PR exercise by South Africa trying to tell us all is well when the real thing underneath is actually not looking too good?
I think that Adam is putting his finger on the issue. The issue is the biggest challenge that we are facing is socioeconomic inequality, which has become exacerbated since 1996, since the adoption of the GEAR policy. Okay. And that's where our attention should be. And that's what Marikana specifically, the massacre at Marikana is a result. The strike action that we've seen, these are the results of this deepening problem of poverty, socioeconomic inequality, and a situation where a large percentage of our population feel excluded from the benefits that democracy has brought. So that is actually where our focus should be. And I think that I'm worried that we're going to get all obsessed as South Africans now with what foreigners, particularly the Economist magazine, and what these credit rating agencies have to say about us. While these we have to remember how these agencies also fit into what is basically a neoliberal hegemony. I looked at the Standard & Poor's report on South Africa, and I didn't find any specific economic indicators. What I did find was a kind of sort of prediction that that South Africa will face in the coming years, up until the next election, greater policy debates due to the strike action, and that is why they're downgrading us, because they're saying that the government's going to have less flexibility, etc., etc. So they're actually, in a sense, what you're looking at is the rating agencies almost taking a preemptive, punitive action to almost, in a sense, warn the South African government to stick to a particular policy line, which is a neoliberal policy line that has actually been the policies that have exacerbated our socioeconomic inequality. So the thing for me as South Africans is we need to in a sense, pay less attention to what these agencies and the economists and so on have to say, and rather sort of deal with what are very, very real issues, very real problems that we have. And if you look at that Economist article, there's nothing new in it. All of those problems are familiar to us.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I want us to talk, when we come back, I want us to talk about whether South Africa is facing, again, a perception issue here, or we are being denialist about what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We take a break, and when we come back, I'd like you to send us your SMSs, 33726. We come back and continue in this topic. Welcome back. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has promised fiscal discipline by limiting government spending, and he has warned government departments to stick to allocated budgets. Let's check this link. Now, Mila, the government may promise a lot of things, and that's one thing. But when I get Facebook messages like this from Denzel, who says, this country is heading down, it can be stopped, though. What we are doing about the problems, or what are we doing about the problems of the land? We need a turnaround plan. Let's start with our top management. The signs and this is Buka Mwenza says, the signs and symptoms are there. However, it takes a visionary, selfless leader to steer the ship out of all the murky waters. However, there's a positive message here from Mandla Ramulahlwani. He says, our country is a good place. Problems that our country are experiencing are just corruption, bad administration, and unemployment. Are we being harsh to a young child here?
Look, Williams, I think, there are a couple of things that have been mentioned which we know that are obviously challenges for us as a young democracy. And I think we need to take the lessons from the past 18 years in terms of what did we do wrong and what do we need to correct. If you look at the macroeconomic side of things, we're looking now at a situation where we have policies that are being put into place. And I believe what we need to be focused on is really ensuring that we implement what is agreed. That's the first thing. The second thing is we talk about this issue of a vision and where the country is going. There is on the table now a national development plan which maps out the kind of country that we'd like to realize. And these challenges are actually articulated in the diagnostic that the National Planning Commission came up with. The issues that have been raised by the professor here, issues of corruption, issues of inequality. These are issues that we need to address. And part of what needs to happen to address those issues is certainly that we need to have a capable state. For us, it's also the issue of how do we ensure that the country becomes competitive. And there is a clear map that's set out in terms of what are some of the critical interventions that we need to make. So in my view, there is a need for perspective. In the quest to address the negatives that we all know and the challenges that we have, we should not overlook the positives that have happened in this country over the past 18 years. And some of them the Professor has actually alluded to. But we also need to take perspective when we look at these rating agencies and look at whether are we really comparing the same things here. Let me give you an example. We have seen, for instance, from a competitive point of view, the IMD yearbook on competitiveness, which clearly shows that South Africa made strides in terms of moving from position 52 to 50. Mm-hmm. And some of the issues that are highlighted there relate to government efficiency as well as corporate efficiency. Now, for me, if you compare that with the Global Competitiveness Index, where we have moved 2 places down, but the strengths that are highlighted, which are issues of corporate governance, the issues of our stock exchange, the regulation thereof, our financial markets, those are strengths that are reinforced by these ratings. And so, again,
but the perceptions about the country or about government and corruption in that space tend to overshadow everything else that you just mentioned.
The point is that we need, as I said, to have perspective and not allow the negatives or the challenges that we currently experience in the country to overshadow the positives that are happening. Let me give you another example. Since we are talking about ratings and rankings, there's an index that has come up, the Nation Brand Index, which has shown that out of 50 countries, South Africa has held its position of 36 last year and 36 again this year. In fact, on the one that you are talking about, which is governance, it has made improvement of 1 position from 41 to 40, and so forth with other areas. Investment, for instance, and South Africa is a country that people would like to visit. Look, so we need to have perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree. I think we do need perspective. I think, for instance, I'm very skeptical about the rating agencies for a number of reasons. I think they made a political analysis and I think they're particularly untrained. I don't think they understand the politics of the country to be able to make this judgment. The last time the Economist made a serious judgment on the African continent, it said it was the hopeless continent. Mm-hmm. And we went from in the next 5 years, we have the highest growth rates on the African continent. So The Economist doesn't have a very good idea about what's going on. They see this through the perspective of the UK
well, the Economist
or the US.
just wrote "Cry the Beloved Country."
That's right. So I don't take either the Economist or the rating agencies very well. I don't think they spoke to the real issues. Having said that, I do think that there is a disappointment among South Africans. And I think that the disappointment can only truly be addressed if there is significant leadership from the apex of the state. There's been success stories. HIV/AIDS is a single story. It's a classic story. We've done other things. But what we need to say is some level of leadership. When the president stands up last week and he says, I would like to look at a voluntary wage freeze, I think that's leadership. But in the next breath, he spends 240 million on the Nkandla homestead. Now that is an embarrassment. You can't do with one hand and then take with the other. That's a lack of leadership. When we see in the Justice Ministry, appointment after appointment of apparatchik, and when it goes to courts, we find that there's been bungle after bungle. That's an embarrassment. When the Spygate tapes are taken up, what happens? It's been given to the president's lawyers. Why is a state product? Why is a state property in the hands of private lawyers? Ask that question. That's a lack of leadership. And as long as government doesn't realize that we need a level of leadership, this despondency is going to exist amongst not only the electorate, by the way, including many members in the ANC. And that President Zuma needs to take responsibility for, and he needs to start showing some leadership in this regard.
Christy, leadership keeps on coming up and coming up and coming up in this conversation. Is this perhaps time to review how we choose leadership in this country?
Their article, they've brought up something that we've, as South Africans, discussed many, many times, and that is the whole issue of our proportional representation system, and that is possibly not the best system in terms of ensuring direct accountability by members of parliament to the people who elect them. So I think that is something that we seriously do need to look at. The Economist didn't figure that out. We've been asking exactly that question for many, many years. In fact, as far back as the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, Van Zyl Sabert still headed up a team that actually made particular recommendations around a kind of mixed system of a constituency system and a PR system in one. And now most recently, another idea has come up, and that is to actually pass legislation to also ensure that internal party processes are democratized, so that you ensure that also within political parties that you have transparent processes, also specifically around funding. Because as we know, there are great questions that we as South Africans are asking ourselves around sources of funding for our political parties, and a lot of South Africans are demanding transparency around that. So yes, there are definitely very specific steps that we can take.
Okay.
Also to ensure that our institutions are not weakened, because we are definitely seeing a weakening of our institutions because of a politicization that we've seen over the past few years, where our institutions are being drawn into internal party battles within the ruling party. And that is a particular issue that we need to attend to as South Africans, and call our politicians to account and say these institutions, in fact, need to survive personalities. You know, institutions need to actually, they are in a way, they are the bedrock of our democracy, and it's very, very important that they remain independent and outside of party politics. But of course, that's the theory. The issue is in practice that needs to be ensured.
When we come back, I'd like us to talk about plans that Mila spoke to. I think that there's been many plans in this country. Question is, are we implementing them? And do we keep on changing plans year after year after year? 33726 is the SMS line. When we come back, we take your SMSs. Welcome back to Interface. My guests are Mila Matola from Brand South Africa, Professor Adam Habib from the University of Johannesburg, and Lindy van Vesthuizen. Now, Mila, I've got an SMS here that says, this country is young. This country is like a girl that's discovering herself as a teenager. Mm-hmm. But it's being messed up by boys. And this, in brackets, they say it's everyone looking into this country and having all their opinions about this country, and they mess up our confidence. I'm sure that's what you would say to me. But earlier when we took a break, I said, you mentioned plans. And the feeling out there is that we've had plans. It's been 18 years. What seems to be missing, which I think Prof spoke to earlier, is implementation. Yeah. We can't keep on changing plans every 5 years when we change government.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree, but let me just provide you with this context, and it's in relation to something that Christy mentioned. You know, the issue of leadership, we approach it as if there's a notion of a big man that has to, or man or woman that has to make things happen. If you look at what we are asking for as a nation, not just from government plans, as a nation, we are asking South Africans to demonstrate leadership. And leadership is across the board in this case, whether it's a civic society, business, and government, and individuals themselves. Hence, the call in the National Development Plan is for more active citizenship, for South Africans to get involved in making things happen. And I think that is important when we talk of the notion of leadership, because we tend to defer to this as if there is one person who's going to make things happen. It calls on all of us. Leadership starts with all of us. The brand of any country, reputation of any country starts with all individual citizens of that country. That's the first thing. Second
thing, government
should
lead.
Indeed, government leads, but you need to understand that the brand of a country is made up of governance and a whole lot of about 5 other elements that make up what we call the reputation or brand of a country. It's not just government. But secondly, the issue of institutions. In fact, if we are going to look at these external rating, international rating agencies and rankings, then we need to again take perspective. The current GCI, which is the World Economic Forum GCI, actually shows that South Africa, on institutions, we haven't actually slipped, as Kitty has mentioned. So we need to have perspective and be very objective if we want to use these things. Thirdly, the issue of the National Development Plan, I do believe, sets a very good compass in terms of where we need to go. And yes, indeed, I agree with you. This is a question of, as I said earlier, implementing, executing plans that exist instead of going over and rehashing policy and rehashing it over. Well, we need to implement.
I agree. I agree we need collective leadership, but let's not get away from the fact that we need the president to lead here. We need government to lead. The National Development Plan and the New Growth Path, there's a lot of overlaps, but there's some serious tensions. Those tensions need to be managed, and those tensions can only be managed by a president or a deputy president saying, these are the compromises. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need leadership from other sectors. Business needs to come to play at the party. Business does not take inequality seriously in our society. And I promise you, if we don't take inequality seriously in our society, this country will burn. What we're seeing is those service delivery protests are violent. Strikes are becoming much more violent. People are angry. And unless business and government begin to recognize the tragedy of what we've created, this country will have a revolution. Now, we're not there yet. We still have some time, so let's not overplay it. But we need to start addressing this. And the single biggest problem in our society today is inequality. Poverty is a moral imperative, but if we do not deal with inequality where CEOs earn 25 billion and pay workers 5,000 rand and then say they must take wage cuts, then we're going to have a problem. And that requires leadership from the business community. It requires leadership from the political elites. It requires leadership from civil society. But ultimately, the two big players are business and government, and they must come to the party.
I'm glad the professor is highlighting that fact, really, that we do need leadership across the entire spectrum, but also the fact that business, civil society have to work together in making these plans. Lastly, that the NDP as well as the New Growth Path are reconcilable. We cannot go over the issues of the differences. Let's focus on what can be implemented.
And I want us to talk about that. Christy, what are the solutions, though? I mean, quickly, what's going to happen to avoid this revolution that Prof is talking about?
Look, first I just want to quickly respond to Mila and say, look, I'm not going to leave the country's future in the hands of the World Economic Forum and other economists. If they decide that our institutions are fine, the fact of the matter is, as South Africans, we know that there's been serious interference in a lot of our institutions, and we actually need to attend to that urgently because our democracy depend on us strengthening. That's one if you want to talk about steps forward. Our democracy depends on us strengthening our institutions and taking them away from personalities and taking them away from intra-party factionalism, which is currently, unfortunately, the problem. The other thing is also, we're talking about civil society, but as we are speaking, civil society organizations are facing incredible stresses in the form of a total lack of funding. And we're seeing even old, very, very well-established organizations like the Black Sash having to retrench people, etc., etc. Rape crisis here in Cape Town, etc., etc. So, and my question is, and this brings us there, I would agree with Mila around active citizenship. The question for me is, South Africans must stop waiting for the politicians to come and do things. We as citizens have to become actively involved. And the first place to start, I think, would be with our civil society organizations, strengthening them and building them. And I think we need to return to our culture of volunteerism that we've had in previous years. Part of why apartheid came to an end was because people actually didn't wait to be paid for something. We were obviously also forced by the
Christy, I have to
extent
right
of that system. But people have to get involved. That's my message.
Thank you very much. And people have to be involved, Prof.
Absolutely.
But aren't people too negative about their own country? As we conclude.
Well, no, I think that the democracy requires people to hold the politicians accountable. I think we mustn't overplay the cards. I think if we simply read South Africa from the headlines, then we'll have a very negative image. There are positive times, but I think we must recognize as a democracy, it's going to be a vibrant democracy. It's one of the attractive features of South Africa.
Are we telling more of our positive stories, though, in conclusion?
I think we should tell a lot more of those positive stories. So, as I said, the issue of building a brand is not just about what we say, it's about what we do. So as we tell the positive stories, we need to also address the challenges that we have in the country. But I think it's also important to highlight that from a Brand South Africa point of view, that's why we are running a movement called Play Your Part. And the whole idea of it is that to get South Africans to play their part in bringing about the kind of country that we envision. And that means that there needs to be leadership from across the board. Hence, we are saying South Africans can play their part in realizing the country.
Thank you very much, guys. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. And that's it for tonight. Interface will be back again next week. Email us on interface on 3SABC, interface on 3@sabc.co.za, or catch us on Facebook. From me, Rems Mawode, and the team is goodbye.